fractions and decimals. You can write a fraction as a decimal by dividing the numerator by the denominator. A decimal stops or terminates, or if a decimal stops or terminates, that is a terminating decimal. So look at this nitrogen example. It says the concentration of nitrogen in a chemical sample is 5/8. Write the fraction of nitrogen as a decimal. Okay, so if it's 5/8, we're going to tip our fraction over and we're going to do 5 divided by 8. When you set up long division, I know it may have been a while, you put your decimal point and then you're going to add some zeros. Okay, you bring that decimal point up as well. And now you say, look at it and you're like, okay, well, does 8 go into 5? No. But does 8 go into 50? 6 times. 6 times 8 is 48. That's 2. And we bring down a 0. Whoa, sorry. How many times can 8 go into 20? 2 times. 2 times 8 is 16. 4, bring down a 0. 8 goes into 40 5 times. 5 times 8 is 40, and we'd have a remainder of 0. So my answer would be 0.625. Okay, so let's do some examples down here. We'll practice together. Okay, 4/5. 4 is being divided by 5. So I'm going to set up, I just always put 3 decimal points or 3 zeros behind my decimal. I don't really know why. Okay, 5 does not go into 4, but does 5 go into 40? 8 times. 8 times 5 is 40. I subtract remainder of 0, so I'm done. Okay, let's look at 7/8. And I feel like I'm like crowded here from my last example. Okay, so 7 divided by 8. I put my decimals, my zeros. Okay, 8 does not go into 7, but 8 goes into 70 8 times. 8 times 8 is 64. That's 70 minus 64 is 6, and then I bring down a 0. 8 goes into 60 7 times. 7 times 8 is 56, and then bring down a 0. 8 goes into 40 5 times. 5 times 8 is 40, and that's 0, so I'm done. 0.875. And then let's look at this last one. It's 3 being divided by 11. Decimal point, bring it up, add your zeros. 11 does not go into 3, but 11 does go into 30 2 times. 2 times 11 is 22. 8, bring down a 0. 11 goes into 80 7 times. 7 times 11 is 77. That's a 3, bring down a 0. 11 goes into 30 2 times. 2 times 11 is 22. I'm going to subtract. You guys can see what's happening here, right? It's going to keep going and going and going and going. So the way that we write this, okay, it's a repeating decimal. So you write it, and you write the portion that's repeating, and you put a line over that portion, right? So 27 is repeating, so we write 0.27, and we put a line over it because 27 is what's repeating. So that goes down to this little line down here that says if the same block of digits in a decimal repeats without end, the decimal is a repeating decimal. The repeating block can be 1 or more digits, right? In the example above, it was 2 digits. Okay, so let's look at 1/3. We'll do a few more. 1 being divided by 3. Okay, so I'm going to do my decimal point, add my zeros, bring my decimal point up. Okay, sometimes the biggest mistake or the only mistake y'all make in these kind of problems is you don't write very neatly. So you kind of get wonky and then you're bringing down wrong zeros and that kind of thing. So just make sure that you're being neat and tidy about it, and it will really help you avoid some mistakes. So 3 goes into 1 0 times. 3 goes into 10 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. Subtract 10 minus 9 is 1. Bring down my 0. 3 goes into 10 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. subtract, bring down a 0. 3 goes into 10. We can see what's happening here, right? It's going to keep going and going and going. So my answer is 0.3 repeating, right? And I put the line over the 3 because that is what's repeating. Let's look at 5 over 9. So 5 divided by 9. Put my decimal point, put my zeros, like so. 9 does not go into 5, but 9 goes into 50 5 times. 5 times 9 is 45. 50 minus 45 is 5. Bring down a 0. 9 goes into 5, 50 5 times. 5 times 9 is 45. Subtract. And it's just going to keep going and going and going. And so my answer is 0.5 repeating. So now look at your next page. It says, you can write a terminating decimal as a fraction or a mixed number by writing the portion of digits to the right of the decimal point as a fraction. Write the following decimals as fractions or mixed numbers. Okay, so we have 1.364. Okay, I'm going to make this go a little bit closer, I think. Okay, so 1.364. So that means we have the whole number 1, and then we have 364 in the thousands place. I'm going to have to lift that up. Okay, so because this is the tenths, hundredths, thousandths place. So now we're going to use our skills, okay, that we have for simplifying fractions. What are 364 and 1,000 both divisible by? Well, they're both divisible by 2. Okay, so we can start with that. And so that would be 1 and 182 over 500. Well, what are these both divisible by? They're both even, so we can write that as 91 over 250. Okay, 91 is prime, and so we're done. Okay, let's look at this next one. Switch colors here. So we have the whole number 2. And then 48 in the tenths, hundredths place. Okay, so what are 48 and 100 both divisible by? They're both divisible by 2. So that's 24 over 50. And what are 24 and 50 both divisible by? 2 again. So 12 over 25. Okay, 0.6. So I don't have a whole number, so it's just going to be a 6 in the tenths place. What are those both divisible by? 2, so 3 over 5. And then this last decimal, I have 275 in the tenths, hundredths, thousandths place. So I know they're both divisible by 5, but I also know that they're both divisible by 25, right? And it takes 4 25s to make 100. So that's 8 to make 200 plus 3 more to make 75. So that's going to be 11 over 40 because I know it's going to take 4 25s to make 100, but it's 1,000, so it's times 10. So 11 over 40. And then on this last section, it says to compare fractions and decimals, write the decimals as fractions or the fractions as decimals. You can decide which is easier for different numbers. So it says when students are asked to which enrichment class they prefer, 0.25 chose sign language, 10 out of 48 chose starting a business, 5 out of 12 chose robotics, and 0.125 chose study time. List their choices in order of preference. Okay, I prefer to put them as decimals. So I'm going to take this 10 over 48, and I'm going to turn that into a decimal first. Okay, 48 does not go into 10, but 48 goes into 100 2 times. 2 times 48 is 96. I subtract, that's a 4. I bring down my 0. 48 goes into 40 0 times. Okay, and so I'm going to stop right there for right now. I don't have my final answer, but I might have enough information to tell what order they go in. Does that make sense? So let's look, okay, and let's do our next one. So the next one is 5 divided by 12. So 12 does not go into 5, but it goes into 50 4 times. 4 times 12 is 48. I subtract, bring down a 0. 12 goes into 20 1 time. 1 times 12 is 12. Okay, and again, I'm going to stop here because if I'm looking at my decimals, I have 0.25, 0.125. I know that 0.2 is going to come in between, or is going to be small, in between these two, right? Because it's a 0 in the hundredths place. And then I know that 0.41 is going to be the biggest. So it says to list their choices in order of preference. So the first choice, right, which one was the biggest number, was 5/12. So that's robotics. Okay, so 0.41, right? And then what comes next is 0.25, which was sign language. Okay, and then it was 0.20, which is the 10/48 part, right? Which was starting a business. I'm just going to write business. And then the least popular one, 0.125, was study time. And then the very last part, we have to put them in order from least to greatest. So again, I prefer to take my fractions and write them as decimals. So that's what I'm going to do. So I have 7 divided by 8. So 7 divided by 8. Okay, 8 does not go into 7. 8 goes into 70 8 times. That's 64. 8 goes into 60 7 times. That's 56. And then 8 goes into 40 5 times. Okay, so 7/8 is the same thing as 0.875. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to do 8 divided by 15. So 15 does not go into 8, but it goes into 80 5 times. 5 times 15 is 75. 15 goes into 50 3 times. That's 45. Okay, and we can see that it's just going to keep going with repeating. So my smallest decimal, what is it? 0.35 is the smallest. Okay, then what would come next? This 0.533, right, which was 8 divided by 15. So what's left, so I'm done that, is 0.862 and 7/8. Well, 0.862 is smaller than 7/8, which is 0.875. So here is our correct order.